Throw out everything in your tackle box except for these items, and I promise you'll start catching more fish than you know what to do with. Today on Bass Banter, we're going to be talking through why not having these 5 pieces of tackle in your tackle box are the only thing in between you and catching more largemouth bass in the Midwest. So stay tuned. You don't need hundreds of lures to catch bass in the Midwest. You don't need 50, and to be honest, you probably don't even need 10. Today, I'm going to tell you why these 5 are the only ones that you really need to master in order to catch more fish in the Midwest. Those 5 are the offset hook, the Ned Jig, a Weedless Swim Jig, a stick worm, and a Finesse Worm. Theme of items in this video is going to be keeping the lures small and weedless. Ponds in the Midwest are notorious for being weedy, especially when you're going to be fishing from the shore. Also, the bass that live in them face a lot of pressure from other anglers. But have no fear, these 5 are going to get the job done. So starting off with the offset hook. This little guy is probably the most important piece of terminal tackle in all of bass fishing, and I prefer to go with the EWG, which stands for extra wide gap. I prefer this to straight shank because I feel that it works better for soft plastic lures and is also a little bit better when you're working in areas that have a little more vegetation and have a little more weeds. As far as size goes, since we're keeping this list to 5 items, I'm going to go with the 1/0 size. Typically, you'll also see 2/0 and 3/0 recommended for bass fishing, sometimes all the way up to 4/0. I find using the smaller 1/0 works the best because you're able to easily switch from a more standard, longer size stick worm to something that's a little shorter in terms of a finesse worm. So I find it as a great all-purpose hook that will get the job done. Next up, and possibly my favorite, is the Ned rig. This might be the most reliable bass setup that was ever made, and it's a simple one. You take a soft plastic with the Ned Jig Head, and that's going to equal a ton of bites. It's especially deadly for the pressured bass in the Midwest, and even better, it works in any weather condition, cold water, summer heat, it does not matter. The key to this is how it gives the soft plastic a stand-up presentation that makes it look alive even when it is barely moving. My strategy with this lure is I like to cast it out, and while I'm slowly reeling it in, give little twitches to make the jig bounce along the bottom, kicking up mud and sediment as it goes. While it's not 100% weedless like some of the other options that we're going to talk about today, you could cast it into open pockets, and to be honest, I find it worth the trouble even if you do get hung up a little bit. This lure is a great option and is great for tough fishing days, and even better, you'll sometimes hook into some random species like crappie or even bluegill. So far, the offset hook and the Ned rig are great for getting you bites when the goal is a slower presentation. But when it's time to speed things up, cover water, and find those aggressive bass, the Weedless Swim Jig is the way to go. It combines the profile of a jig with the motion of a swim bait, and the weedless design allows you to throw into grass and punch into shallow cover without getting hung up. When you're picking one of these up at the store, make sure you get one that has the angled bristles that covers the hook to reduce the chances of you getting hung up on weeds. I find it to be a great search bait for those Midwest ponds that are full of weeds and vegetation where crankbait or jerkbait won't work so well. You can find the fish fast before slowing down to more finesse techniques. It works well with or without a trailer, and it is great for finding those active bass and triggering aggressive strikes. The trusty stick worm. I personally have dozens of lures in my tackle box, and 9 times out of 10, I'm going to reach for the stick worm. And since we're keeping this list to 5 items, I'm going to go with the 5-inch Senko. This lure works great in any condition. Clear water, dirty water, shallow areas, grass edges. And in the Midwest, when you're fishing from the bank, since a lot of times it won't get too deep, I hardly ever throw this lure with a weight. I find that the weightless setup allows it to fall a little slower through the water and give it a more natural appearance. There's really only 2 ways that I'll rig this worm up, and that's either a Texas rig or a wacky rig. I'll use the Texas style rig when I want to be able to throw through a little thicker vegetation and when I want to fish a little bit quicker, and when I really want to slow things down, that's when I'll switch over to the wacky rig. So let me know down below what color worm you like throwing the best. Now last up is the finesse worm. and my favorite is the 2.75-inch Finesse Worm that Z-Man makes. And theirs is my favorite because they're super elastic and naturally buoyant. And the smaller profile gets bites when the bigger lures just simply stop working. Now, typically I'll throw this onto the Ned rig, and sometimes I'll even toss it onto a Texas rig with the offset hook, and I'll throw it shallow. And this allows it to fall even slower than the traditional Senko to give even more of a finesse tactic for those finicky fish. Also, it is my trailer of choice when throwing the Weedless Swim Jig that we talked about earlier. The key to pulling fish out of pressured areas is to give them something different to look at, right? They see a lot of large baits, they see a lot of fast moving baits, and so the Finesse Worm gives them just that, something a little more subtle. I find it works best on clear days, if it's sunny, not a lot of wind, if you're fishing relatively clear water. But on the other hand, if it starts to get a little cloudier out, if it's dark, if the water's a little more murky, that's when I think you should switch over to something a little bigger, like the 5-inch Senko that we talked about, or the Weedless Swim Jig. Bass go about finding their food using sight and feel. The lateral lines that they have on them allow them to pick up vibrations in the water. So when visibility drops, I would say that's when it's time to switch your tactic to something that's a little louder, a little bigger, something that's going to let them know that your lure is in the area, and that's what's going to get you bites and allow you to catch more fish. So to wrap things up here, these 5 pieces of tackle work great together when you're trying to travel light and still hook into some fish. The Senko and the Finesse Worm allow you to have a little bit of a slower presentation, a little more finesse, a little more subtle, and the Weedless Swim Jig allows you to cover water without getting hung up too bad. But let's not forget the Ned rig, old reliable, allows you to still catch bass when the fishing gets tough, or when you're able to cast into some areas where the vegetation is a little thinner. So I hope you guys learned something here today, and with that being said, get outside and get after some bass.